Hi guys, my name is Crystal Villarreal, and this is going to be my evidence-based project. So my PICO question had to deal with, is electrical stimulation effective in healing pressure ulcers? Well, it kind of comes into the next effect on what is a pressure ulcer. Pressure ulcers have to deal with injuries to the skin and underlying tissues that after a prolonged time of lying down or sitting. So it can be causing the pictures above, you can see where it happens most of the time, in the elbows, where they sit, like in their bottom area, the hip, and behind the head. So that's where all the prominent parts they happen in. In the ulcers, they do happen in 4 stages, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And each time they're getting more severe and deeper and bigger. So they do unfortunately hurt a lot of the patients. So this is what they look like. Now the E stimulation is a gentle pulse current that goes through the skin. And then you're going to see in my articles that these E stimulations are going to be placed in between the wound and never on top of it. This is to increase the blood flow of the wound on it. In my first article, you're going to see the title. And so it's pretty much evaluating the healing processes of pressure ulcers treated with cathode high voltage. In the first hypothesis, you can actually read that the cathode high voltage is capable of decreasing the pressure ulcer's surface area regardless of the wound shape and can significantly accelerate the healing process. So it's pretty much going to see if it's going to work or not. The participants that happened in this were 49 participants, and they all had to be over the age of 60 and above, and had to have the chronic pressure ulcer stage of 2 and 3. The design study on this had to be prospective, randomized, and double-blind. So prospective meant that they were going to observe the outcome of the wound. The randomized meant like there was going to be experimental stimulation and people that just got the control. Double-blind meant that the people that were giving the electrical stimulation didn't know they were going to give it until the time, and that the patients as well did not know they were going to receive it. So it's kind of both of them didn't know. The independent variables that we're going to go into next is the high voltage current was the independent variable delivered through the cathode, while the dependent variable was going to deal with the wound area reduction. So depending how the wound did was dependent onto the current. The methods that resulted into this were going to be 50 minutes per day, 5 times a week for 6 weeks. So that was a method, and the results out of that were successful. They were able to see a reduction to the wound size. The only limitation that they had was that it did not, it was only 6 weeks, and they wanted to do more time on that. The second article, as you can read, it's pretty much that this had to do with the cathode current, and this time they were going to also add cathode and anode high voltage to it. The first hypothesis is actually like the first article, which is going to be the high voltage is going to be delivered only to the cathode and replaced by the anode, and will effectively promote the healing. While the second one was actually going to deal with the cathode and anode, similarly effective in treating pressure ulcers regardless of how they were applied. Before I go into the design study, the participants actually were still the same. So it still involved a little bit more, like 63 participants, and they were above the age of 60. And they were actually having the chronic stages of pressure ulcers of 2, 3, and 4. So that was like the biggest differences on those. They had a little bit more chronic stage. And the design study on this were prospective and randomized. Prospective, like I said, was going to be observing the outcome of the wound, and randomized that they were not, the patients did not know if they were going to be the experimental or control. The independent variables are what next. The high voltage pulse current is delivered through the cathode. That is the independent variable, which is, the next one is kind of the second independent variable, which is going to be the high voltage of the cathode and the anode put together. But both of them were going to deal with the dependent variable of the wound area reduction there. The methods are still the same, which is 15 minutes per day for 5 times a week and for 6 weeks. The results out of that were successful, and that they were able to achieve that electrical stimulation worked for both. Now the only difference was that cathode current did have a much bigger reduction rate than it did with cathode and anode, so that was good. So we can actually say that electrical stimulation is effective for pressure ulcers. The only limitation is time. So the only thing I would change is, if I were to ask the next question, is this going to work with younger generations, cathode stimulations? Now, for a little fun time, I have a pop quiz. How many stages are there in pressure ulcers? If you said 4, you're correct. There was 4 stages in pressure ulcers. The next question would be, name 2 characteristics the patients had to be in order to participate in both of the studies. If you said they had to be 60 years and above, correct. And if you also said that they had to have the chronic stages of at least 2 and 3, you're also correct. And here are my references. Thank you for listening.